Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining from. Welcome to the CSW69 Parallel Event titled Wartime Sexual Violence and Transnational Feminism Movement. My name is Gamja, and I am honored to be your moderator for today's important discussion, hosted by the Korean Council for Justice and Remembrance for the Issues of the Military Sexual Slavery by Japan. This event reflects on the history of transnational women solidarity in addressing military sexual slavery and examine the 30 years since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. We have an esteemed lineup of speakers who will share their insights and experiences on this critical issue. Thank you all for being here and for your commitment to justice and remembrance. To begin, we will watch an opening message video from two distinguished speakers. First, we will have Lee Young-soo, a survivor and women's rights activist, followed by Lee Na-young, the chairperson of the Korean Council and a professor at the Jungang University.
Sexual slavery, no! They don't have fingerprints. They stopped fingerprinting. Just signing. Yeah. But still.
안녕하십니까, 이용수입니다. 위안부 문제 해결하기 위해서 세계 여러분들이 모였습니다. 북경에서 여성대회에서 위안부 문제 해결하자는 이게 시작한 지가 30년이 넘었습니다. 그래도 아직까지 위안부 문제가 해결되지 않고 있는 것은 도저히 참을 수가 없습니다. 여러분, 다시 부탁드립니다. 이 위안부 문제가 해결되도록 여러분들 끝까지 참석해 주셔서 이 문제가 해결되도록 해 주셨으면 하는 위안부 이용수입니다. 간절히 바랍니다. 끝까지 참석해 주셔서 해결되도록 하여 주시기를 간절히 바랍니다. 고맙습니다.
안녕하세요. 정의경연대 이사장 이나영입니다. 오늘 CSW69 패러렐 이벤트에 참여해 주신 모든 발제자분들 그리고 이 이벤트를 지켜보고 계신 각국의 시민들에게 감사와 환영의 인사를 전합니다. 이번 행사는 북경 행동 강령 30주년을 맞아 전시성폭력과 여성폭력 문제에 대해 주도적으로 역사를 써내려온 일본군 성노예제 문제 해결 운동에 대한 세계 시민들의 목소리를 듣기 위한 자리입니다. 그간 우리가 어떤 실천을 했고 또 아직도 여전히 미진한 부분은 무엇인지, 그래서 우리는 어떻게 행동해야 될 것인지 다시 한번 확인하고 연대를 다짐한 자리이기도 합니다. 지금 전 세계 곳곳에서는 여전히 분쟁과 전쟁, 여성 폭력이 끊이지 않고 있습니다. 우경화와 여성 인권에 대한 백래시도 더욱 거세지고 있는 상황입니다. 이런 힘겨운 시기에 우리는 일본군 성노예제 문제 해결을 위해 다져온 초국적 여성연대의 힘을 되돌아보고 재확인하고 우리의 행동을 다짐할 필요가 있습니다. 지금 한국의 민주주의, 여성인권, 평화가 위협받고 있습니다. 해서 제가 광장에서 농성 중이기 때문에 직접 여러분들을 찾아뵙지 못하고 인사드리지 못함을 진심으로 죄송하게 생각하고 아쉽게 생각합니다. 그럼에도 불구하고 각자의 자리에서 우리의 연대는 계속될 것입니다. 북경 행동 강령의 정신과 의지, 우리의 열정과 우리의 용기, 그리고 우리가 했던 행동들을 계속해서 이어나갈 것을 다짐합니다. 감사합니다.
Now, moving on to our opening presentation, we are pleased to welcome Oh Kyung-jin, Vice Chair of the International Solidarity Center at Korea Women's Association United, who will present on BPFA and wartime sexual violence against women.
Oh, hi everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm really honored to be speaking here at this event. My name is Kyung-jin, as the Kamja introduced me. I'm working for the Korea Women's Associations United as a vice chair of International Solidarity Center. So my presentation will be about the historical advancement of women's rights, especially the global mechanisms and norms on violence against women and women in war conflict. So before going to my presentation, I would like to briefly introduce about my organization, 한국 여성 단체 연합, Korea Women's Associations United, called KWAU. So my organization was founded in 1987. It is an umbrella organization. We have 7 chapters and 29 member organizations in South Korea, try to achieve gender equality, democracy, and peaceful reunification in the Korean Peninsula by facilitating solidarity and collective actions among women's groups. So as we are working with different member organizations in South Korea, we have so many objectives, but I would like to put focus on one of our key area is addressing the issues of the Japanese military sexual slavery. So we are working in close solidarity with the Korean Council for Justice and Remembrance for the issues of military sexual slavery by Japan, so which is the event organizer. So let me briefly introduce about the UN Commission on the Status of Women. We call it as a CSW because this event is also a part of the CSW as an NGO forum. So CSW established in 1947. So this is the principal global intergovernmental body, which is under the UN Economic and Social Council. So it is mandated and dedicated exclusively to the promotion of gender equality and women's rights. So CSW holds its annual 2-week session every March at the UN headquarters. So it brings all together of the the main stakeholders on women's rights, including UN member states and civil society organizations and UN institutions. So CSW's key functions is promoting, shaping, and global standards on women's rights and gender equality. It also closely monitors the member states' implementation of these global standards on women's rights. So, CSW has been playing a major role in promoting gender equality and women's rights in 2 UN discussions and policy documents, which have been produced in UN level. So it is also responsible for implementing the Beijing Platform for Action and monitoring the implementation of the SDGs from the gender perspectives. So as we are celebrating the adoption of the Beijing Platform for Action, 30 years anniversary. So this year's theme for the CSW69 is the review of the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. So yes. So Beijing Platform for Action was adopted in the 4th World Conference in Women, which was held in Beijing in 1995. So this World Conference on Women was held in Beijing, and it is considered to one of the largest gatherings of the government, NGO, and media representatives, even for a UN conference. So at that time, there were the government's delegates from 189 countries, and there were more than 50,000 participants from the civil society groups. I heard that more than 500 participants from Korea women's rights groups also participated in this World Conference and Women in Beijing. So this fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing is also considered to be a very, very important event in terms of international women's rights movement, because in that conference, we could witness that there have been so many influence from the women's rights advocacy groups. So that's why we could adopt the Beijing Platform for Action. So what is the Beijing Platform for Action? This is an outcome document which was adopted unanimously by 189 countries in the Fourth World Conference on Women. Sorry, I think it is a spell error. And it is born out of the context of the rapid development of various global mechanisms on women's rights since the 1970s. So it can be the document that was consolidated 5 decades of legal and policy advances towards women's rights. So far, Beijing Platform for Action is considered to be the most comprehensive and progressive global policy document on women's rights at the global level. Because there are many reasons that we cannot produce the more progressive global documents at the UN level after 2000. There was a 9/11 event, and also after 2000, we saw there are so many polarizations in terms of women's rights, and also there were the attacks from the fundamentalists in some of the countries. So nowadays we are living in the world where we cannot actually agree the progressive global documents on women's rights at global level. Beijing Platform for Action is a soft law. So it means that it doesn't have the legal binding power. So it only implies a moral obligation for member states to comply. So CSW has been a preparatory body for the Fourth World Conference on Women. So it has played a central role in monitoring the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, including organizing its implementation review for every 5 years. So let's look at the 12 critical areas of concerns of the Beijing Platform for Action. So there are so many issues, right? But I will put focus on 3 issues. The one is the violence against women and human rights of women, and also women and armed conflict. So before going to the historical importance of the Beijing Platform for Action in terms of women's rights in armed conflict and war, we need to look at how the global standards on women's rights have been developed throughout the years. So when you look at the historical momentum and events which have advanced women's rights at the global level, we can say that the advancement of the global standards on women's rights can be the process of recognizing women's rights as a human rights issue. And also that was the process of expanding the scope of human rights so that we can include the people, the group of people that were not really considered as a human rights issues. So when here I just put some the purple colors on the important events and momentum on the development of the women's rights, especially the violence against women and women in armed conflict. So you see here, in 1979, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women has been adopted, and this is the mandate of this convention is very strong because it is legally binding document. But at that time in 1979, when CEDAW Convention was adopted, the violence against women agenda was not really considered as a human rights issue. At that time, rather, the violence against women is considered as just a private matter between individuals or the matter that has to be resolved only within family. So so when we are reviewing the implementation status of the CEDAW Convention by the member state and also by the CSO, the violence against women agenda is categorized as the prejudice and then cultural practices. So yes, so when you look at here, in 1992, General Recommendation number 19 on violence against women has been adopted. So 1992, so CEDAW actually could produce the document about the violence against women, which after almost like 14 years after the CEDAW original version of the CEDAW Convention was adopted. And in 1990s, there have been a very rapid and comprehensive development on global norms on women's rights, women's human rights, and also violence against women. There was also the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and in 1993, there was a World Conference on Human Rights, and the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action was adopted as a result document of this World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna. And in 1994, there was an appointment of Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. And finally, after 1 year, there was a fourth World Conference on Women, and the Beijing Platform for Action was adopted. And Beijing Platform for Action included the agendas of women's human rights issues, especially women in armed conflict and war. So I want to briefly introduce a little bit more about the World Conference on Human Rights, which was held in Vienna in 1993, because that World Conference was such an important momentum for the development of the women's human rights and also the violence against the women agenda. The declaration, Vienna Declaration, recognizes women's rights as being protected human rights with a particular focus on violence against women, meaning that the vulnerability of women to sexual violence, especially during armed conflict, is explicitly recognized and condemned as a human rights violation, which requires a particularly effective response. And there were tremendous efforts and fighting and advocacy of the international feminist activists to put a focus to try to include the women's human rights agendas and violence against women into the table of this conference. So at the Vienna conference, there was a tribunal organized by the NGOs, and then in that tribunal, there were testimonies and women's stories, experiences about the violations of women's human rights around the world, specifically focusing on the sexual violence during armed conflict. So there were also statements included from the former comfort women. So there's Article 38 in the declaration saying that the violation of human rights of women is in situations of armed conflicts are violations of the fundamental principles of international human rights and humanitarian law. All violation of this kind, including in particular murder, systemic rape, and sexual slavery, and forced pregnancy require a particularly effective response. So this World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna and also the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action was a really important moment, and it was important momentum for the development of the human rights, women's human rights agendas, especially women in armed conflict. And at the same year, in 1993, the Declaration on the Elimination of the Violence Against Women was also adopted. So this declaration identifies three main categories of violence against women. The first one is the physical and sexual psychological violence occurring in the family. And the second one is that violence occurred within the general community. And the third one is that violence which perpetrated or condoned by the state. The important point of this declaration is that the declaration explicitly recognizes that women in conflict situations are especially vulnerable to violence. So in 1994, the UN General Assembly appointed the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. And the first Special Rapporteur on this issue was Kumarasamy. And Kumarasamy is also a very famous figure for us because Kumarasamy report included the Japanese military sexual slavery agenda. And that for that report, I know that there were also so many the tremendous efforts of Korean women activists, especially the senior member of the Korean Council, fearlessly advocated for that issue towards the special rapporteur. So, so in her preliminary report, she presented the issue of Japanese military comfort women around the world, including South Korea, the Philippines, in China, as the clear case of the violence against women in war and armed conflict. So there were final reports submitted by her, and that reports were submitted to the Commission on Human Rights in 1998 and 2001. And in those two final reports, there were also a comprehensive research about the Japanese military comfort women and how this issue should be resolved. So every time I study about the agenda of the Japanese military sexual issues in South Korea, this report is like the first starting point for me to study. So I just wanted to put focus on this report and the special rapporteur on violence against women. So finally, I'd like to, Leslie, I'd like to briefly introduce about what contents are very important in the key area of concern of Beijing Platform for Action. So there is one area of concern in BPFA, which is women in armed conflict. And when you look at the paragraph 135, you see like here I put the purple color in the important sentences. See, the parties to the conflict often rape women with impunities, sometimes using systemic rape as a tactic of war and terrorism. And impact of violence against the women and violation of the human rights of women in such situations is experienced by women of all ages who suffer displacement, loss of home and property, loss or involuntary disappearance of close relatives, poverty, and family separation and disintegration, and who are victims of acts of murder, terrorism, torture, involuntary disappearance, sexual slavery. So in that content, the sexual slavery is clearly recognized as a form of the violence against women in armed conflict. So there are some strategic objectives in every key area of concern in Beijing Platform for Action, and I would like to introduce what specific recommendations in this issue. So look at the paragraph 145. These recommendations should be done by the government and international and regional organizations. And when you see the purple color, you can see it specifies clearly a full investigation of all acts of violence against women committed during war, including rape, in particular systemic rape, forced prostitution, and other forms of indecent assault and sexual slavery. Also, it clearly specified the government and the international and regional organizations should prosecute all criminals responsible for war crimes against the women and provide full redress to women victims. So when our advocacy, in our advocacies towards the Japanese military sexual slavery issues, this key area of concern, the women in armed conflict, tells us what the government should do, especially in terms of resolving the issues. It has three contents: the full investigation of all acts committed by the government, by the parties, conflict parties, and also all the criminals responsible for war crimes should be prosecuted, should be brought to justice, and also the women victims should be provided full redress. So that's why the Beijing Platform for Action is so important global document in our advocacy for these issues. So this is the end of my presentation, and thank you. I thank you for inviting me as a speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyungjin, for the insightful presentation. It is meaningful to address BPFA today to raise awareness against wartime sexual violence against women due to the ongoing war around the world. So now let us proceed to our case presentations, where we will hear from the three experts on different aspects of transnational solidarity and historical justice. First, we have Rosanna Cabuso, Executive Director of Lila Filipina from the Philippines. She will present the Filipino Comfort Woman issue, The Continuing Quest for Justice, 30 Years Post-Beijing.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. So I will talk about the Filipino Comfort Women issue, The Continuing Quest for Justice, 30 Years Post-Beijing. By the way, I was a young activist when Beijing happened in 1995, and I was able to witness, well, actually not the official event itself, but the parallel NGO forum that was held in Huairu, China. And if I remember correctly, some of the Filipino comfort women likewise attended the official event and submitted their own position papers as to regarding the issue of Filipino comfort women. So, like many, the Beijing Conference of 1995 gave much hope to the women of Lila Pilipina, as it did to many women elsewhere. After all, it was an unparalleled global event, one that put the spotlight on an immense range of women's issues, all summed up in the need to advance women's rights to equality and emancipation from discrimination and poverty. The Beijing Conference provided a conducive atmosphere for the flourishing of international attention and support for the cause of comfort women. The Beijing Platform and Declaration of Action propelled countries into drafting national action plans for promoting gender equality in various fields. Various mechanisms of the United Nations became platforms for calls for redress. Two important developments, the Kumaraswamy and McDougall reports that came in the immediate following years, further legitimized the victims' claims and strengthened the international push for Japan's response to the issue. But while all this were happening at the international level, however, the struggle for Filipino comfort women's justice for Filipino comfort women at the home front was on a different and in many ways more difficult plane. Cases filed by Lila Pilipina with the Tokyo District Courts were dismissed in 1998, or 3 years after Beijing, on the basis that, quote, individuals cannot be subjects of international law, unquote, unquote, and that it was therefore a matter for the diplomatic authorities to deal with. A subsequent case filed with the Philippine Supreme Court was likewise dismissed. In the same year, the Japanese government established the Asian Women's Fund in response to the international outcry following the revelation of the victims' stories. But the Asian Women's Fund was not the official reparations that the victims were fighting for. They were donations from Japanese citizens and private corporations facilitated by the Japanese and the Philippine governments. The Asian Women's Fund became a thorny issue that succeeded in dividing the ranks of the victims, a division that would significantly weaken the movement itself. But efforts at protest and legislation continued through the years. In spite of the Philippine government pronouncements for women's rights, however, it continued to ignore legislative proposals filed by women congressional representatives, such as the one filed in 2018 for an investigation into the disappearance of a comfort woman statue on Rojas Boulevard, Manila, after the Japanese government expressed regret over the establishment of the statue or for any memorial elsewhere in the world. In 2023, the UN CEDAW Experts Committee issued recommendations for the Philippine government to rectify its discriminatory policy against victims of Japanese wartime sexual violence by granting recognition and reparations for several petitioners from the Malaya Lolas, a group of victims of mass rape by Japanese soldiers. But the Philippine government responded several months later by refuting the assertion that it has discriminated against the victims. Government placed a clear distinction between Filipino war veterans who were clearly conscripted to render service to the nation and were therefore entitled to recognition and compensation. The women victims of slavery, however, did not have this status according to the government. Its treatment, thus, according to the government, its treatment of war veterans were according to provisions of both international and domestic laws, implying that it cannot accord the same to victims of wartime sexual slavery. So while some advances have been made as far as women's rights are concerned, the United Nations itself reports a rather gloomy picture as far as women in conflict is concerned. Quote, more women live in conflict and crisis 30 years after Beijing. In 2023, more than 170 armed conflicts occurred. 612 million women and girls lived within 50 kilometers of these, more than double the number in the 1990s. This alone is a vivid indicator of the backslide that has occurred in women's conditions in significant parts of the world. 30 years after, victims of Japanese brutalities during World War II remain unresolved, particularly in the Philippines, where past and present governments have either ignored or were themselves party to the suppression of the victims' rights to redress and freedom of expression. 30 years after, Japan carries on with its war agenda as a junior partner of the US in the Asia Pacific, while cruelly carrying on with its denial about its record of past abuses. It is correct to say that the comfort women demand for justice is primarily a matter between the aggressor state of Japan and aggrieved nations, in this case the Philippines, to settle. There is, however, much room at the international arena for recommendations that will hopefully move forward the process of atonement and rendering of justice for comfort women and other cases of military sexual violence against women. 1. For the international community, including various mechanisms of the United Nations and the Commission on the Status of Women, to renew recommendations to urge Japan to finally atone for its wartime crimes, 80 years after the war ended. 2. For the relevant UN agencies and the CSW to work for the establishment of mechanisms for addressing the grievances of women victims of wars of occupation, especially those currently living in conditions of occupation. 3. Call for the establishment of mechanisms for redress of grievances of women victims of military sexual violence within member states. 4. Establishment of funding mechanisms to assist women victims of occupation and women NGOs and rights defenders working to prevent or stop abuses, ranging from their economic needs, safety, travel, education, and so on. Exchanges among women organizations working on this field should also be strengthened and expanded to promote not only solidarity, but concrete exchanges for strategies and common advocacy programs on states involved in wars of occupation. Many of the victims of Japanese wartime abuses have passed away, and only a few are surviving. But we refuse to forget. This issue of Japanese wartime military sex slavery will not go away as long as Japan does not recognize its responsibilities and sincerely atone for its crimes. It also will not go away so long as wars of occupation, militarism, and authoritarianism are happening in the world. To quote Lola Estelita D., who spent her lifetime being at the forefront of the struggles of Filipino comfort women, but who herself has also passed away recently, I do not expect to see justice in my lifetime, but all I want is for our horrible experience not be repeated in the present or ever in the future. There should never be another generation of comfort women. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation and for shedding light on the ongoing struggle for justice. It seems like we need transnational solidarity and share our strategy to each other to solve the Japanese military sexual slavery issue, since this crime has occurred several different parts of Asia and still not recognized by the Japanese government. And now we'll have Bang Hak from Korea, an activist from Korean Council. Their presentation is titled Transnational Solidarity in the Movement of Japanese Military Sexual Slavery Issue, BPFA, Status on Implementation in Korea. Please proceed with your presentation.
Before I start, I would like to send a great gratitude for the all speakers today for sharing your expertise. So my name is Pangak from the Korean Council, and I'm in charge of the International Solidarity Department. So I will introduce briefly about the movement in Korea to redress the Japanese military sexual slavery and about the BPFA today. The movement to address the issue of Japanese military sexual slavery serves as a symbol of post-colonial solidarity and transnational women's solidarity. Emerging from grassroots efforts, it has made a significant impact on the history of international women's and human rights movements and continues to write history. The movement has transcended historical reflection and evolved into a major international initiative to protect women's human rights in situation of war and armed conflict today. In November 1990, the Korean Council for Women drafted for military sexual slavery by Japan, which is the Korean Council, was established. On August 14, 1991, the late Kim Il-sung, who was the victim survivor of the Japanese military combat women, testified in public for the first time. Also in August 1992, the following year, less than a year after the Republic of Korea accession entered to the United Nations, the late Hwang Geum-ju and the Korean Council brought the issue of the Japanese military sexual slavery system to the UN Subcommission on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights for the first time. The subcommittee was able to discuss human rights issues beyond the state's interests. So the Korean Council appealed to the international community through oral statements, a press conference, and NGO briefings with two agendas, which is contemporary forms of slavery and the right to restitution, compensation, and rehabilitation for victims of gross violation of human rights and fundamental freedoms. The Korean Council's active advocacy, including lobbying UN committees, generated significant attention within the international community. So as a result, in 1993, the report that included the issue of reparation was adopted by the UN subcommittee. And the Korean Council recognized the importance of strong international solidarity. The Korean Council proposed the Asian Solidarity Conference held from August 1992 to NGOs and victim survivors. The conference resolved and addresses the issue regarding the participation of intergovernmental organizations as civic groups. Since then, through the continuous effort of Korea and Transnational Women's Coalition, significant international achievements have been made, including the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the designation of UN Special Rapporteur, the submission of special report and recommendation from UN treaty body. Such transnational solidarity has led to the recognition of Japanese military sexual slavery issue as systemic rape, sexual slavery, and similar practices during wartime. So IGOs such as UN and ILO still continue to call for resolutions. So in June 1993, the World Conference on Human Rights was held in Vienna, Austria. NGOs from Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines participated in the conference. During the conference, the Global Tribunal on Violation of Women's Human Rights took place, where the late Kim Bok-dong testified. The Korean Council held the Asian Women Forum and NGO briefings under the agenda War Crime of Military Sexual Slavery by Japan, the unresolved case of comfort women in Asia with North Korea and the Philippines. The Korean Council collaborated with international women's organizations to ensure that women's rights were included in the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action. As a result, the World Declaration of Human Rights recognized the sexual slavery as an example of the violation of women's human rights during armed conflict. Furthermore, a special rapporteur on violence against women was designated at the conference, which triggered the submission of the issue of the Japanese military sexual slavery to UN Human Rights Council as a special report on violence against women. And in September 1995, the primary agenda of Beijing World Women's Conference was violence against women, bringing international attention to the issue of the Japanese military sexual slavery. The Korean Council participated in the NGO Forum from August 13 to September 8, inspired by the Global Tribunal on Violation of Women's Human Rights at the 1993 Vienna Conference. Women from around the world organized events to accuse and testify against crimes committed against women. The Beijing Tribunal on Accountability for Women's Human Rights was held, and the late Jang So-eun attended and testified. Her testimony conveyed that the issue of abuse, violence, and discrimination against women is an extension of historical patterns of violence against women in various parts of the world, and also as experiences of a survivor of systemic sexual violence. This message inspired courage and resonate with women internationally. Alongside the efforts to resolve the issue, the Korean Council asserted the need for legal reparation from the Japanese government and also opposed Japan's entrance to the UN Security Council and rejected the Japan's proposal for the Asian Women's Fund, which had been discussed at the Second Asia Solidarity Conference in 1993. These actions garnered significant attention from international media and women participants. Through the efforts of civil society in South Korea and other countries, the BPFA states that serious violation of women's human rights occur, particularly in armed conflict, and recognize that acts of sexual violence during armed conflict are war crimes and crimes against humanity. Additionally, it includes the provision of uphold and reinforce standards set out in international humanitarian law and international human rights instruments to prevent all acts of violence against women in situation of armed and other acts of conflict, and also undertake a full investigation of all acts of violence against women committed during war, including rape, in particularly systemic rape, prostitution, and other forms of indecent assault and sexual slavery, and also prosecute all criminals responsible for war crimes against women and provide full redress to women victims. This is an essential achievement in the movement, which has achieved international consensus that considers sexual slavery as a war crime against women and requires the investigation, punishing the perpetrator, and reparation. The Korean Council has fostered transnational women's solidarity from the perspective of East Asian women, changed international women's rights covenants, and contributed to rewriting the history of international women's rights. The movement to resolve the issue of Japanese military sexual slavery has played a central role in building transnational feminist solidarity from standpoint of other women, distinct from Western white-centered feminist theories and movements. Recommendations, reports, and declaration of IGOs became the foundation of international human rights norms regarding wartime sexual violence. This led to resolution in 8 countries besides Korea, the US, the Netherlands, Canada, the EU, the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, and Australia. Victim survivors and international citizens emphasized the need for the international community to condemn violence against women during war by convicting Emperor Hirohito and the Japanese government guilty at the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal on Japan's military sexual slavery in 2000. 5 years after BPFA, in October 2000, UN Security Council Resolution 1325 was passed unanimously. The resolution called on all parties to armed conflict to take special measure to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, particularly rape and other forms of sexual abuse, all other forms of violence in situation of armed conflict, and emphasize the responsibility of all states to put an end to impunity and to prosecute those responsible for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, including those relating to sexual and other violence against women and girls. And in this regard, stresses the need to exclude these crimes where feasible from amnesty provisions. The movement to resolve the issue of Japanese military sexual slavery has become a model for transnational women's solidarity. However, 30 years after the BPFA and 25 years after the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, the perpetrators of Japanese military sexual slavery have not yet been punished. Um, the truth has not been fully investigated, and full redress and legal reparation have not been provided. In December 2015, the South Korean government announced the 2015 South Korea-Japan Compo Women Agreement, which did not include the victim's will. This has been criticized by several treaty bodies, including the UN Committee of Elimination Discrimination Against Women, the Committee Against Torture, and the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, for not being victim-centered and for not including full redress. However, the South Korean government announced its position to comply with the 2015 Korea-Japan Agreement as an official agreement during the 4th Universal Periodic Review, the 54th UNHRC, and the 9th UN CEDAW review of the South Korean government. On November 23rd, 2023, the Seoul High Court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs in a lawsuit against Japan for damages. The court ruled that the Japanese military sexual slavery during the war constitute a severe human rights violation, not subject to state immunity, and consequently ordered the Japanese government to provide reparation. However, the South Korean government has maintained its position to comply with the 2015 Korea-Japan Agreement and has constantly refused to take any further action without pursuing diplomatic efforts to seek reparations. According to the Fourth National Action Plan of South Korea, the government aimed to strengthen international cooperation to restore the honor of the victims of the Japanese military compo women. Yet the government remained silent even after the Japanese government stated at the Third Committee of the UN General Assembly in 2024 that the accusation of the Japanese military sexual slavery issue was erroneous and groundless and thus not acceptable. The Japanese government has repeatedly recommended to provide full and effective redress measures and reparation to the victim survivors. Still, at the 9th UN CEDAW review of Japan, the government referenced the Asian Women's Fund, which is a private fund that has caused opposition from victim, survivor, and citizen, and the Reconciliation and Healing Foundation, which also has been also dismissed by the opposition of victim, survivor, and citizen as examples of efforts. As the perpetrating country, the government has not taken concrete responsibility for truth, justice, reparation, and prevention of recurrence. The BPFA stated full redress for victim survivor, including investigation, official apology, punishment of those responsible, legal reparation, and measure to prevent the reoccurrence. It also emphasized that sexual slavery in conflict is a war crime. However, the Japanese government insisted that the ruling of the Seoul High Court in 2023 was against international law. And moreover, the government put every effort to deny history, such as removing the Japanese military sexual slavery issue from textbooks and attempting to remove the statue or memorial. The movement to resolve Japanese military sexual slavery in Korea resonated globally as the voice of silenced victims were heard, leading to broad international solidarity. Transnational women's solidarity has influenced UN mechanisms regarding sexual violence in conflict, including the BPFA, and changed international human rights norms on wartime sexual violence. Despite the insufficient measure taken by both Korea and Japanese government, the Korean Council has been actively engaged in a comprehensive movement to implement the BPFA. This include legal actions, memory struggles to prevent recurrence, and legislative initiatives to protect victim survivors from defamation. The failure of states worldwide to investigate and punish wartime sexual violence also contributes to ongoing impunity for violence against women in many countries today. Beyond the Japanese colonial and war crimes of the past, women's rights continue to be severely violated in conflicts around the world. In this regard, we strongly call for the practical implementation of the BPFA at the state level on the issue of the Japanese military sexual slavery. And Ms. O actually, the former speaker, Ogyungje, actually uh, informed that the BPFA is a soft law, but still, we call for the government, the development of comprehensive government plans and the strengthening the institutional mechanisms to access and ensure the effective implementation of these measures. As we reflect on the achievements of the movement, we emphasize that the effort to address the issue of Japanese military sexual slavery and development of international human rights mechanism on wartime sexual violence were made possible through transnational women's solidarity like today. So, as a lesson, we call on civil society to foster a stronger solidarity and confront the challenges ahead without hesitation. Thank you.
Thank you for your powerful insights and continued with activism. The Korean Council has been passionate to solve the Japanese military sexual slavery issue through many different channels like UN. After 30 years of BPFA, it seems like it's a great time to check our strategies due to the changing situation. And lastly, we will welcome the Teresa Daolanye from Taiwan, a professor at National Taiwan University and the board director at Taipei Women's Rescue Foundation. She will present Memory to Mirror, reflecting on Alma's legacy in Taiwan.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, my name is Teresa, and I am here on behalf of Taipei Women's Rescue Foundation, which is an NGO responsible for the service offered to Alma in the past. Thank you very much for the organizing committee to invite us to participate in this parallel event. I believe this issue is of particular importance, especially at the 30 years anniversary of the Beijing action of plan. And our foundation is working on women's rights from the beginning. The two major things are rescue trauma and the transformed culture. And we believe that gender equality means justice. And our agenda for action includes direct service to all the gender-based violence survivors. And also, we also advocate for the legislation to prevent all the gender-based violence. Finally, relating to the rescue trauma theme, we have the long-term cyber groups for all the survivors of the violence. And on the side of transformed culture, we have all kinds of exhibition research going on, and we try to bring this to our mandatory educational system as an NGO helper. And also we step into the community and we ally with other CSO community in Taiwan, trying to move the prevention of gender-based violence to another level, which is we see the cultural root of this problem, and we try to work with men and other CSOs to try to change the culture. I believe in East Asia culture, we share a lot in common. For example, the patriarchal leveling of men and women in the society. And also in terms of the prevention, we try to introduce the third party intervention into the violence scene where the third party can intervene. So through our service to AMA, we try to connect these two things together because we all here understand that there is a gender-based violence continuum. And what we discussed today is the from the very left to the very right, in the beginning of the social norm of the to entitle men to the sexual service of women, be it in the military or be it in the other situations, to all the deaths, the femicide of our amas during the Second World War. And our past as a foundation, we try to rescue the prostituted indigenous young women to the former comfort women and also the domestic violence survivors and to the children witnesses domestic violence. And also we tackle the porn problems, which is very popular among the younger generation, in particular male students. And starting from 2014, we engage our efforts in the cyber violence prevention against women's part. 2 years later, we established the first AMA museum in Taiwan, and later we moved the museum to another location, and we have a new exhibition format, which Professor Heisu Shin thought it was much, much better than the previous one. And 2 years ago, we started to help all the prostituted women in Taiwan, trying to assist them to leave prostitution. That's the most recent effort we had regarding to this violence against women spectrum survivors. And for the AMA pass, we started working with the Taiwanese women who were very brave to come to identify themselves as the former comfort women, following suit from the Korean and the Japanese scholars' discovery, and especially Madame Kim's testimony. And then we started the recovery workshop after we lost the lawsuit in Japan, in Tokyo. And then we participated in the Tokyo Tribunal. And I believe that that was a very encouraging experience for all the AMAs and we as the service providers, the assistants. Although I was still very young at the time, but I was encouraged a lot and inspired by all the AMAs participated in the tribunal. And then we try to link AMA's movement to the Me Too pioneer in our country, and we also try to relate to the Rescue Your Heart and the Stop Modern Slavery campaign we had in Taiwan with AMA's endeavor in the past. And so in my presentation, I'm going to divide it into the Ama's time and our time, since all the Amas in Taiwan have already passed away. So we are talking about the legacies of our Amas in Taiwan. For the first part, for Ama's time, I'm going to focus on the trafficking and the trauma recovery and the agency and the resilience, and also the Me Too movement. For the human trafficking issues, we relate our Amas experiences with their forced dislocated into many corners of the Far Eastern, including the Southern Asia. And in Taiwan nowadays, we also have this kind of human trafficking problem. Some of our younger generation who try to improve their economic situation, just as Amas did in their youth, trying to go to the South Asia, trying to improve the family situation. And we also would like to promote the campaign to end the victim blaming, and also trying to prevent our younger generation being trafficked into the Southern Asia. Although the commercial trafficking seems to be a little bit different from the military trafficking, but they seems to have the similar intention, and the perpetrators would try to control them. They have no way out once they were put into a limited venue. And also they serve similar purpose, both commercial and the military trafficking. They have to be the game of a certain group of people or a certain institution. In Ama's case, that will be the Japanese military system. And they also have the similar initiation process. They were under threats, they were coerced, and that sometimes they were tricked into this kind of being the victim of human trafficking. And they were exploited without their consent, and they have the similar victim reason, trying to get out of the debt or the poverty for their family, and that they suffer from the similar harms, either it's physical or mental, or their lives, and that they bear similar stigma. The shame, the discrimination against these survivors never really leaves them. And for the gender-based violence trauma they suffered, our Ama went through a series of recovery workshop. And this is some of the photos from the workshop. You can see they try to paint themselves, and they try to experience the occupation they would like to try. But as we did for Ama, we try to do for our gender-based violence survivors now in Taiwan too. Everybody can give a hand, and everybody can become a rescue, because the similar trauma we understand, they need a long time recovery. So this is how Ama can inspire our survivors. For example, this is a poem written by one of the Amas in Taiwan. After bandaging my injured self, the present I love you very much. The future I love you even more. If Amas can do that, all the victims of the gender-based violence can do that one day. For agency and resilience, we try to connect Ama with the Anne Frank's diaries in Europe, and we try to have an exhibition trying to let the younger generation understand if they are going to go through war, this might be something happen to them. we juxtaposing two different narratives, but very similar on two sides of the earth. And we try to see how Anne Frank trying to protest against this war within the very confined space, and how are Amas trying to walk out of their fear and shame and stigma, and they try to protest against this war crime against women. And for the enabling environment we try to create for the Amas during the years we provided service, to let them feel safe, to let them feel that they are able to voice out, for them to be able to make peace with what happened to them. And one of the Amas says, "I forgive you, Japanese, even though you did this to me." And so at the end, we had a commencement for all the Amas through the workshops, recovery workshops at my university, the National Taiwan Universities, as a closure to their recovery journey. So after they all graduated from this earth, we are going to move to another time that is our time. We're going to talk about how to keep their memory alive, because it's a tug of war between oblivion and memory, and also trying to see Ama as our mirrors. We have a lot of educational activities held in our museum. We also going out into the fields, go to visit all the elementary schools to let them understand what happened to children, young girls under the war. And we also try to create at our museum a space for dialogue. This is one of the very popular young men's group singers in Taiwan, and they try to use their reputation to introduce Ama's issue to their fans. So that was very successful. That happened earlier this year. And also we try to connect with the wider audience through the internet. For example, the Tokyo Tribunal, the 25 years after, we had a series of podcasts or the online forum to introduce the Tokyo Tribunal to the younger generation. The first gentleman is the leader of the prosecutor team from Taiwan, and the second speaker is a female reporter visiting the Ukrainian warfield, and she tried to connect what happened to women in Ukraine to what happened to Ama so many years ago. And the last one is we invite an international human law scholar to compare how we could try to savor this horrible narratives in the terms of the laws and the human rights under wars. And also we have, in addition to the forums, we also focus on the preventing the trafficking issues in Taiwan. And also we try to relate to the Same-Sex Marriage Act recently passed in 2019 in Taiwan, and also the He for Fun campaign we had in Taiwan. And we also use a lot of QR code, phone number, or cell phone app trying to reach all the survivors of the gender-based violence survivors. And we have a spatio-temporal coexistence for dialogue in our museum, and we invite all of you to come to Taipei to talk to us and to be immersed in this space for Amas only. And we call this Amas House because we want to save a place for all the wartime sexual slavery survivors in the world, for them to memorize the history, for them to transpass the trauma. And with Amas narratives, we would like them to inspire our own efforts to walk our paths, to secure justice for them. Thank you very much. At the end, I would like to use the quote from one of our Amas. I am the witness. I am here. It's not over yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this meaningful presentation on historical memories and its impact today. As time passes by, victim survivors are leaving us while the Japanese military sexual slavery issue is still not solved. Without actions like Ama Museum and Taipei Women's Rescue Foundation, it will be hard to find justice for the victims and follow the spirit of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Just Action. And now we are open the floor for a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please use the chat function or raise your hand. We will try to address as many as possible within the time limit. So I will read through the questions that we got from chat. So I'm just going to basically read it. Thank you very much for the event. My name is Marcio Diaz, and I'm a PhD student in international relations from Brazil. In my research, I seek to understand the comfort women reparation movement from the perspective that interrogates memory, trauma, and justice. I have two questions. One, in recent years, status representing comfort women have been made in South Korea, the Philippines, and Taiwan. How have this status contributed to the movement, and what are the limitations of their impact? Two, inspired by the Transnational Comfort Women movement and the incredible work you do, I would like to know how I can help the case from Brazil. In July, I will be in Seoul presenting my research at the 28th World Congress of Political Science, and it will be an honor to be a part of the Wednesday demonstration with the Korean Council. So I think the first question, like every speaker that participate in here can answer. So anyone who's ready, you can answer. Okay.
Yes. Thank you for the questions about the Statue of Peace. I think it's the questions about the Statue of Peace recently. I would like to emphasize that the Statue of Peace is actually the not only just memorizing the victim survivor of the Japanese military combat women, but it is also making a spear and also the communities for the locals, international locals, to remembering the violence against women and also the wartime sexual violence and also the peace. For example, the Statue of Peace in Berlin is a lot of Berlin locals actually gathering up and make the community next to the Statue of Peace, and they are not just commemorating the victims of World War II, like for example at the International Women's Day, they also like holding an event near the statue. So like all speakers today actually introduce about their activities and transnational movement and also how it evolved not only just the agenda of the Japanese military sexual slavery to the women's rights issue, women's human rights issue, and also the gender-based like protesting against the gender-based violence. This is shows the spectrum and the power of the statues for now. And also in Korea also last February 16th, one of the victim survivor, Kirono, she was also very feisty women's rights activist, but she passed away. But so in Korea, there's only 7 survivors left. But even if I know that the Japanese government and also somehow the Korean government is waiting for victim to pass away to make them silence, but the statues or the memorial or the symbols or the collective memory, like the Ama Museum, is not fade away. So that is the like long lasting and eternal power for collective memory. So I think that is the statue contributed to the movement for now. And for the second questions about the how can you help from the Brazil, uh, like the Ama Museum is like fighting for like justice and fighting for to collect all the memories and bring the new or new generations. I think it is very important to uh, make a community base in Brazil. And I know that also in Latin America and also the Brazil has a issue of the femicide. So start on that community to expand the meaning and also like stand in solidarity with the Japanese camp for women's victim. That'll be the great opportunity to start on the movement. Yes, thank you. And if there is any suggestions from the Philippines and also the Taiwan, please share your view because especially the Philippines, you said the statue was also the memorial also disappeared before. So could you also share the cases or experiences?
Yes, thank you. In the case of the Philippines, the Comfort Woman statue actually was a powerful rallying symbol for many of the people to understand and know about the history of the Philippines and the wartime crimes that were committed by the Japanese Imperial Army against thousands of Filipino women. But its removal also served to, raise so many questions in the minds, especially of the young people, as to how come, such seemingly innocuous matters would have to be done by Japan, its removal. So they begin to question why and begin to understand as well the complex relations that govern the issue of the comfort women. In the particular case of the Philippines, it's neo-colonial relations with Japan, which continue to this day, which started in World War II and continues to this day. So many questions and issues are now being examined by young people whenever we go to them. And this also becomes some sort of a rallying point for them to become active in the support the campaign for justice of Filipino comfort women. They're also very much now interested to learn also about the campaign for justice that has been done by comfort women movements in other countries like Korea, China, etc. I think the comfort women movement or campaign has always thrived on international solidarity. So I think your role in Brazil and many others who would be interested to support the cause from Latin America would be a very, very big help to the Comfort Women campaign for justice. I think the Japanese government has, on so many occasions in the past, tried to present this issue as simply a matter between Japan and South Korea, when actually it is not. No, it is more than that. So I think giving it more global, shall we say, perspective would be a big help. And in particular, since we're talking about Beijing 30 years after, I think awareness raising is very much an important activity that can be done. And so are local actions. But I think lobbying with your own members, with your own governments, especially those who are member states of the United Nations, no, in various mechanisms, UN mechanisms, we have been trying to lobby these mechanisms in order for them to be more responsive to the issues being raised by comfort women. So we have now not only the Commission on the Status of Women, but there are also other mechanisms like the Universal Periodic Review of Human Rights, many other mechanisms, no, that can be where governments or member states can have a say or influence the outcome, or at least support or bolster the demands that are being raised by the comfort women's groups. But of course, I think that will also require first an awareness, a social campaign in your own country about these issues, so that when you go to your government, you now have a stronger voice, not to support the demands of the comfort women.
This is Teresa from Taiwan. I am still having difficulties turning on my camera, so just my voice. Thank you for the question from the floor, and I would like to start from the second one if you would like to permit me to. We do have traveling exhibitions from Taiwan side. I believe in Korea, in Philippines, we do have some materials. So maybe we could collectively organize a traveling exhibition going to South America, including Brazil, because accompanying this traveling exhibition, there would be peace education activities. There will be recovery a workshop to assist anyone who need the survivors recovery assistance. For example, our foundation helped the NGOs in Liberia and in Uganda with their post-war recovery journey, and also trying to make peace with the wartime sexual violence is really very essential part of the transitional justice. And in many countries, as far as I know, this is something lacking in the transitional justice process. This is my answer for the first one. For my second one, the Statue of Freedom. In Taiwan, we try to make the comfort women issue or the Japanese sexual slavery issue a party neutral problem. We do not want to being favored by any political parties in Taiwan. As you know, in Taiwan, the political situation is kind of torn between the bipolar parties. The statue in Taiwan was raised by one of the more conservative party in Taiwan, which is a long-reigning political party. And it was not consulted before it was raised, and later, maybe 2 years later, it was removed because of some of the protest from the local people. So that's the thing happening in Taiwan, which is a little bit more complicated than our foundation would like to participate in. But we still want to keep Hamas issue as a national issue instead of a political party's issue. That's my answer for the first one. For now, we don't have any Statue of Freedom issue erected in Taiwan, but I wish that we could do someday with our collaboration with the Council of Korea, and also other NGO parties, so we can really make it political party free, and it's a total remembrance of the Amas. Thank you.
Thank you. I also have two questions. The one is we would like to visit the CSW for CSW69, but we couldn't since after the martial law. There's a lot of situation ongoing, vigorous situation ongoing in Korea. So could you, especially the Oh Kyung-jin and also Teresa Delany, could you share the experience of the CSW69, the atmosphere, or the how the NGOs or the states are discussing about the for example BPFA plus 30?
Maybe I can go for maybe there's
Oh, okay,
you
go
can go
ahead.
first. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm still here at the CSW69. I didn't know that Teresa, you also attended the CSW69 event because we just met each other online here in this event. So I have been fully participating in the CSW69 since last Tuesday. So nowadays, as Bang Hak said, the Korean situation, especially the political situation, is such in a turmoil. So, but here in the US, the situation is not really positive, I think, because of maybe because of the Trump, the new president of the US, is trying to cut many like projects and also the funds towards women's rights and gender equality and diversity. So the funding situation is not really good. And also there are so many wars and armed conflicts going on, especially in Palestine, in Gaza, and also in Ukraine. In so many other countries, there are many wars and conflict situations are going on. And also the one thing which is very special is that normally during the 2-week CSW, at the last day of the CSW, there comes an agreed conclusion, which is the outcome document of 2 weeks discussion at the CSW. But this time, the main theme of the CSW69 is the Beijing plus 30 anniversary, meaning that the main theme of this CSW is about the implementation status and appraisal of the Beijing Platform for Action in its implementation. So, on for the Beijing plus 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, there comes an agreed document called political declaration, not an agreed conclusion. But this time, the political declaration has been already come out. So there are not many discussions and advocacy activities towards the member states to include the progressive women's rights languages into the agreed conclusion are not much going on. So rather, this time, like for me, it's more like networking with other feminist activists from all over the world and try to follow up some of the discussions going on during the member states and also from the side events and as well as the NGO parallel events. So there are many frustrations, and we see so many gaps between the realities of the lived women on the ground, especially in the global south, and all the hopes and aspirations for the Beijing Platform for Action in 1995, 30 years ago. So there are many frustrations, but also I'm seeing still the positive side of the feminist collective organizing, because even though the anti-feminist backlash and also anti-rights movement are being organized and also being strengthened all over the world. It is not only happening only in South Korea or in Asia Pacific region, but it actually happening all over the world. However, still feminist activists are fearlessly fighting back against them. So I see many frustrations and gaps, but at the same time, I'm witnessing so many aspirations like coming again from the collective organizing of the feminists at the global level. So Teresa, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I can't agree more with you. Yeah, I also witnesses a lot of frustrations from the feminist scholars and feminist movements, activists, and so on. I believe BPFA kind of a progressive agenda 30 years ago, yet the delivery is still much, much behind. And we see many governments trying to say that they are fulfilling their promises, yet the progress that I saw in many NGO forums, they try still to ask their government to give more fundings in order to reach some of the bars that was raised in the BPFA. And another thing that I realize in the NGO panels are feminists. Just the term feminism appear a lot compared to 4 years ago. It might be because of our new UN Women director standing on feminism, or it might be due to the more young feminist scholars and activists come aboard to promote women's rights issue compared to the previous generation. A lot of those women leaders may collaborate with the governments a lot. So now we have a more radical voices we heard regarding the reproductive rights, even under the war, and also the reproductive rights related health issues to women under the wartime. And since I am a long-term member of the WILF, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, we focus on how the small arms, especially the guns and the knives, how they can represent threats to women's daily life. So if we cannot have security in our daily life, it means we will have no security at all during the wartime. So these two issues are much related, and it also related to, for example, Taiwan is under a tremendous threat nowadays, as you all can realize, and we still need to focus a lot on how we can prepare our people for the real wartime. Although this is an issue lacking discussion in Taiwan and lacking discussion in the CSW panels, but I believe this is something that we should all consider, the spectrum of violence against women, how it accumulates itself during the wartime. And another trend I witnessed is for my past 10 days in New York, I realized that younger people more and more went to CSW. And in some of the panels, I realized that all younger generations, for example, under 40s, they organized the panels and they spoke at the panels. So I believe this is something we should bring our movement campaign to the younger generation level in the future. And finally, I would like to say that I participated in 2 panels organized by both the a Filipino scholar and also a Korean NGOs on the either the Tokyo Tribunal or the comfort women issues to memorize the 25th anniversary of the 1325. I hope that accomplish your observation.
Thank you for the answers. And there's more questions towards the Professor Teresa regarding the memory to mirror presentations. So the first question is, how can the legacy stories of the Ama in Taiwan be passed down to younger generations in positive way, particularly for school children? And also, how should school textbooks appropriately frame this dark chapter in history? And 3, are there any museum exhibition or similar initiatives in Taiwan that might spark broader public interest in the Ama's experiences? And finally, how can younger generation come to terms with such a painful past, possibly cultivate an attitude of forgiveness? So this is, I think, basically the questions about the future generation and the education and how to remember in the educational system. So could you briefly answer about these questions?
Thank you, Dani, for your question. Okay, for your first question, well, we do go to the schools and we train school teachers from K1 to K12, even to the to the high school teachers. We train them to use the teaching materials box we developed. If you remember from my presentation, there is a kind of suitcase symbolizing Ama's suitcase when they were trafficked to the Southeast Asia. And inside that suitcase, we have a lot of replica of the things that Ama used in the comfort station. And we even have some replica of the photos that they took during the period, so the children can know that. On the other hand, we have the picture book aiming at younger generation, for example, age 10 to 15. So they can read the picture book, which is a young girl talking to her grandmother regarding the Ama's experience back in the World War II. So through these, we try to reach to the school children. Number 2, yes, for now in Taiwan, the school textbooks, they only have one line in the high school textbook in one textbook manufacturer. That is, the Taiwanese women were exported to Southeast Asia to serve as comfort women, period. Only one manufacturer in one textbook, only in a high school level. The rest of the levels, 0. Okay, number 3, Are there any museum? Yeah. Our museum exhibitions is permanent. So anytime if you come to Taiwan, it's there. And also we have traveling exhibition to the universities, and we collaborate with some of the universities. For example, like National Taiwan University, Minor University, we have the guided tour for the college students to relate to the issues. And also the next one, come to terms with the painful past. I'm not sure in our effort we have already cultivated an attitude of forgiveness, but given that our younger generation has a thing for the Japanese pop culture and the Korean pop culture. So I believe they are torn between the issues. It depends on how much they would like to put themselves in the shoes of Amas and gender-based violence victims. So I believe this is a very idiosyncratic in each different case. So sorry, I don't have a real answer for that, but I hope we did that, but I don't know yet. Thank you for your questions.
Okay, so it looks like we can close the Q&A session for now. And to those who participate in the presentation, is there anything you want to share before we conclude today's event, like sharing us your ideas on how to continue this movement?
Yeah. May I say something? Thank you. I think having seen both the Beijing conference in 1995 and 30 years after, for me has been both rewarding and at the same time really very frustrating. And I think this webinar also brought many ideas and many insights by our wonderful speakers on the many issues that have still to be done as far as women's rights and the impact of wars of occupation on women are concerned. No? But also I have been wondering actually all these years as to why there seemed to be a dichotomy that the United Nations has placed between what it calls aspects of violence against women. Through the years that we have been doing lobbying, for instance, you would find that violence against women has been, how should we say it, confined or rather defined to a limited definition of what we call or what they would call gender-based violence. And at the same time, which at the same time tries to sort, in effect, no, puts a limitation or puts less spotlight on other forms of violence that are politically related and war related, and makes and I have been wondering whether this dichotomy has contributed to the fact that while many advances in women's rights have been made through the years, but the impact of armed conflict and wars of occupation on women's rights have not been as widely discussed in many mechanisms and many conferences that are being held at the United Nations. And I think this brings us 30 years after to an urgent task of re-examining how we really define violence against women and what is the role of the states, especially powerful states, in either fomenting a chaos on all peoples of the world, men and women included, and how, with one flick of the finger, it can easily stop war, such as what we saw in the case of the Trump administration, when it suddenly just said, to Ukrainian President Zelensky, no, you have to stop the war, and the war seems to have stopped. In the case of Palestine, when all international laws are being violated and women and children and men as well are being killed wantonly, for the sake of advancing the agenda of the two most powerful states in the world, I think, which is US and Israel. And in the case of Japan, for instance, our own experience with Japan, its continued refusal has simply obliterated, no, or seemed to have obliterated all avenues for winning justice for the Filipino comfort women, except that we are intransigent women. We do not give up. And I think this character of the women's movement all over the world that our speakers have mentioned earlier, our ability to fight back and our ability to form international solidarity, especially at the most difficult times, is one of the most powerful weapons that we have in advancing our cause. And I think this webinar has been very instrumental in providing the opportunities for sparking new debates and new conversations and new dialogues on this issue. Thank you.
Anyone else who wants to share?
First of all, I would really appreciate for our speakers, even in the, the CSW and the situation of each countries. Thank you for everybody to participate in this event. And like every speaker said, this is the very frustrating times, especially in Korea. The democracy is retreated, and also still a lot of women are on the street to fighting against the democracy and basic human rights. And also in this in this situation, while I'm preparing my presentation, I watched the survey of the CSW that to the state members about how they implementing the Beijing the platform for actions last 5 years. I looked up for the South Korean government and also the Japanese government, and it was very frustrating because every UN treaty body review and the UN any kind of event, they are repeating their words, not suggesting the detailed or very specific plans for the not only just the Japanese military sexual slavery victim or issue. They do not speak up enough about the victim survivor from the wartime sexual violence, especially in Korea. Also, not only the victims of the Japanese military comfort women, also there's victims during the Vietnamese wars, also of the sexual violence by the Korean soldiers. But still in Korea, there's a lawsuit against the Korean government, but the Korean government is still refuse the judgment or the rule in favor of the plaintiff in Vietnamese victims. So they are not providing, not only the Japanese government, also the South Korean government, they do not providing enough like the redress or plans or implementations. But still, both countries are keep insisting that they are doing an effort to restore the honors of the victims, survivors by like preventing it by funding GSF, and it's all same rhetoric every time. But still, for us to we should confront each government in our own space. But still, I think this is a very important time to make a solid international solidarity like this. Due to there's also the backlashes through the UN, the CSW sessions and everywhere. So yes, I would like to send my great gratitude for all once more, and thank you for you sharing the aspiration and ideas today. Thank you.
Thank you for all. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can be very quick. So it's really irony that we are here to celebrate the Beijing plus 30 anniversaries, but we are such in a very, very frustrating situation. Only in my country, South Korea, and also in the UN, US, and also all over the world. But as you said, like the Beijing Platform for Action was a really good tool for us, the South Korean feminist activists, um, to do some advocacy activities in advancing legal and policy improvements, especially the sexual violence in wartime. But that would be only a technical process if there is no strong political will from the government and also the more stronger and comprehensive implementation mechanisms at the global institutions as well. So yeah, it's really irony to celebrate the Beijing 30th anniversary now. However, I really believe that our this cross-national feminist activism and solidarity, we're going to win. Thank you.
Any words you want to share, Teresa, or I'm just gonna wrap up this event just for now?
Okay, I just have a few two sentences to say. If any country would like to be the so-called the big power in the world, they need to face their past. They need to recognize what they did wrong in the past and then move forward. I believe this is something to fire us up in our way forward. Thank you.
Okay, so as we conclude today's event, I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of our speakers and participants for joining this important session. The fight for justice, remembrance, and solidarity continues, and each of us plays a role in ensuring that the voices of survivors are heard and their demands for justice are met. Thank you once again, and we look forward to continued collaboration in the pursuit of human rights and historical justice. This concludes our session, and have a wonderful day.